This is your World War III update. Here's what's going on. They've done a complete 180 and the mask is now completely off. I got some really bad news and some good news. The good news is that you're going to be getting the following information first before anybody else does. The bad news is that it's probably not going to make a lick of difference and the outcome is going to remain the same. Nonetheless, it will give you more motivation to prepare for what's about to happen. I warned you months ago that the current administration, the trajectory of their foreign policy, would not differ one iota from the previous one. In fact, we were going to see an acceleration. In the current administration's attempts to distinguish itself from the previous, they engaged in this phony baloney diplomacy in an attempt to set up the opposing side, be they Iran or Russia, as an even greater pariah when those talks eventually failed, as they currently are right now. Let me run through the incredible sequence of events that we've seen over the last 7 days that absolutely nobody is connecting the dots to, okay? Never mind the fact that against the backdrop of all of this, we have an escalating trade war with China. We have the ports in LA that are becoming more vacant by the day. And remember, this all pertains to the enmity between China and the United States. Let's walk it back. There was a massive port explosion at Iran's biggest port that now one of the top Israeli generals is claiming was an act of sabotage. It was not an accident. That's from an Israeli general. Now, that doesn't mean they're taking credit for it directly, but what that does mean, and what we do know, is that there are certainly dissident elements within Iran who are engaged in these hostile acts. We've seen that play out over the past year. This is no exception. We have a port explosion. Suddenly, an F-18 just falls off an aircraft carrier, right? Because the evasive and the hard turn of an aircraft carrier has enough inertia to throw off some of the planes. Just one though, right? Now, let's take that at face value. Okay, what happens next? Well, we have the Israeli fires, which appear to be acts of arson because they emerged on multiple fronts. Now, if they're in a drought, if the conditions are ripe, then that's the only way wildfires are going to typically ever burn. The conditions have to be there beforehand. But of course, you could have had perhaps a naturally occurring fire, and this gave opportunistic arsonists who wanted an easy win to potentially be able to go in there, or perhaps it was even, elements, saboteurs from Hezbollah or Lebanon, Palestine, who knows who it was. Regardless, that's a sequence of events. Port explosion, F-18 falls into the ocean on the same day. We have Israeli fires. Now we have negotiations delayed. Then we have Pete Hegseth issuing what really ultimately, when you really understand the subtext, amounts to a nuclear threat against Iran, seemingly out of the blue, right? And then we also have Trump issuing secondary sanctions. All the while, we are being told that these negotiations are going great. The negotiations that have now been delayed. And let's recall that the original letter that was sent by Donald Trump to the Ayatollah with a 2-month deadline, I think initially it was even sooner than that. I think it was 1 month, but they extended it to 2 months. That was issued on March 7th. So that brings us to May 7th as a potential date, or at least between now and the near-term future, we are going to see an inflection in hostilities in this theater. So now today we have the sacking of Mike Waltz. Why is that important? Well, I think they needed some sacrificial lamb. Trump knows what's about to happen in the Middle East and the escalation of hostilities in Russia. Not only does this position Waltz, who's now been given the role of UN ambassador, which of course he's going to be able to speak on behalf of the current administration to the UN when the United States inevitably enters into war with the Iranians and when hostilities start to intensify on the Ukrainian front, which they absolutely are going to. This is what you need to understand. If people haven't realized this by now, I don't think people are they just have their blinders on because of the political hocus pocus. But I would strongly encourage you to just try to see things for how they are unfolding right now. Within the span of a week, we went to negotiations are going great with Iran, to one of the biggest explosions in that country's history, not in terms of warfare, but in terms of asymmetrical warfare. The loss of a plane, possibly two planes, into the ocean, Israeli fires, arson attacks, destabilization in Syria that I forgot to mention with the Druze, and it looks like Israel's about to make a move there, and all of these other moves, and now Trump imposing secondary sanctions. Now, what this means is that in line with what Brian Berletic, our guest yesterday, I would strongly encourage you to go and watch that video because he lays out exactly what is happening right now. The United States is creating the illusion of being a good faith broker of peace so that when the hammer finally drops, the Iranians are going to seem like a uncooperative pariah, an even bigger pariah than they're currently viewed by much of Trump's voting base right now. Okay, and not all. I understand that many people who voted for Trump don't want a war in Iran. I'm not trying to make a generalization here, but he does still have the political capital, but he has to walk that fine line. That's why you sack walls, right? So it looks as though, hey, I got rid of this guy. And of course, somebody had to be the fall guy for all the fallout from the Signal chat leaks. And they can't get rid of Hegseth because they need Hegseth to rally up all the young men who they're going to need to conscript in the future, okay? Because the war is coming. Now, here's what Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said yesterday. We see your lethal support to the Houthis. We know exactly what you're doing. And remember, this was a day after that plane supposedly fell off a ship. The Houthis claim they shot it down. And there's a possibility that that is true. It is not beyond their capabilities. If they can shoot down the drones operating at 50,000 feet, there is a possibility that maybe they got a plane or maybe they were able to target the aircraft carrier itself. Who knows? Or it was just an evasive maneuver. Either way, this really pissed off Pete Hegseth, okay? And he made it known. You know very well what the U.S. military is capable of. Well, apparently they're not capable of at least quickly defeating the Houthis because they're still fighting them with their best military equipment, including a third of their B-2 stealth bombers. And you were warned. Now, he does say you will pay the consequence at the time and place of our choosing. So he's saying this is not a if-then statement. This is you did something and we are going to respond at the time and place of our choosing. Now, that's incredibly escalatory language, and I don't believe that he's referring to the sanctions that were imposed today that were actually directed at China by Trump. I'm going to show you his tweet in just a moment. Please stick with me, guys, because this is very, very important. All of the dots are getting connected today. Now, when he says this is a tacit nuclear threat because we know that if they can't defeat the Houthis utilizing conventional weaponry and doing these standoff strikes, how are they what possibly could they do to the Iranians? Could they do some decapitation strike from the inside? Do they have sleeper cells throughout Iran? They being the CIA and the Mossad? Probably. And that would be an incredibly destabilizing force. Now, how Iran responds is another story. The Iranians are actually playing this surprisingly smart. And I don't have the actual tweet by the Iranian foreign minister, but it is using very congenial language and not getting aggressive, not responding to Hegseth messaging in a negative way, because I think at least the mullahs understand there, perhaps not the political class so much, but the mullahs understand exactly the game that is being played. And it's very likely that they're being advised possibly by the Russians, maybe the Chinese, or maybe they're just good at playing this game. The Ayatollah Khamenei is kind of like their Medvedev. You know, he just says whatever he wants, and it's always death to Israel, death to the United States, whereas the political class kind of, speaks in the language that Witkoff speaks in. Now, this is what Donald Trump had to say. This is extremely escalatory, okay? He says, alert. It's like he's been watching my videos or something. He's taken a lesson out of the book of Nate. All purchases of Iranian oil or petrochemical projects must stop now. Okay, so imagine you're in negotiations with a country and you know that one of their primary sources of revenue is oil. The only way to feed their 90 million people. And you are effectively now imposing an embargo on Iranian oil that, of course, has been in place for a long time. But now you're doubling down on that in the thick of these negotiations that are going great and we're going to get a deal and blah, blah, blah. Oh, this is just Trump being tough, though, right? Any country or person who buys any amount, and I'm gonna say it like he wrote it, any country or person who buys any amount of oil or petrochemicals from Iran be subject to immediately secondary sanctions. They will not be allowed to do business with the United States of America in any way, shape, or form. Who is it that buys the most oil from Iran, period, point blank? That's the Chinese. Now, the Chinese ports are already slowing down. So this is just the icing on the cake of the trade war, and it shows you exactly what the end game is here. It's all about China, okay? So this is not only a threat to the Iranians, this is a major threat to the Chinese, who are currently doing war games out in their neck of the woods in the Indo-Pacific. We're not going to talk about that today because this is my primary focus, because this is where things are about to pop off. However, with the signing of the so-called rare earth mineral deal, or whatever the hell it was yesterday, which is really just a smokescreen so that the United States can do lend-lease with the Ukrainians and send more weapons in under the guise of, oh, we're just going to help you build back your economy and blah, blah, blah. All the talk about $500 billion needs to be repaid and all of that has been written out of it. You know, they're still making threats to bomb the Moscow parade. The only way they could do that is with Western intelligence. You haven't heard Trump or anybody condemn those remarks by Budanov or by Zelensky. So you really have to ask yourself, who is the tail wagging the dog, or what's going on here if we are told that the administration in Kiev has no real authority? Then why does it seem at every corner the United States is either ignoring or kowtowing to the current, dare I say, administration? I should probably call it a regime, because it certainly is starting to resemble something of a totalitarian sort. But this is extreme. And this is out of nowhere, okay? I mean, not out of nowhere. It's after an F-18 fell into the ocean. And now what they're saying, get a load of this, okay? This is important. Listen to this. Let nobody be fooled. Now okay, so this is from March, but of course it ties into what we just seen. Let nobody be fooled. The hundreds of attacks being made by the Houthi, sinister mobsters and thugs based in Yemen who are hated by the Yemeni people, all emanate from and are created by Iran. So they're putting the blame for the F-18 falling into the ocean smack dab on Iran. Any further attack or retaliation by the Houthis will be met with great force, which is ridiculous when you're kind of bombing the shit out of their country. Now remember that the Houthis suspended their attacks when the Gaza ceasefire was announced. It was only after the ceasefire was broken that the Houthis recommence their attacks, and then the United States decided to ratchet up that conflict. Every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from the weapons and leadership of Iran, and Iran will be held responsible and suffer the consequences, and those consequences will be dire. Well, here we go. This is where we're at. This is that Israeli general who says that the Iranian port blast could be a planned attack, not an accident. In fact, his verbiage was far more absolute than that. This attack was on fuel for ballistic rockets, so it makes sense that this is a planned attack and not an accident, he claims. And that's not from an Iranian propaganda source, that's from the Jerusalem Post, because the Iranians know it would be incredibly destabilizing and invoke all sorts of consternation if they were to admit that there were saboteurs within the ranks who were blowing up facilities. That would put people on edge, okay? Now, Trump announcing sweeping sanctions against Iran. I've already talked about this, but this is incredibly significant because it's a shot across the bow towards China, all right? Now, Donald Trump decided to let him down easy, and he said, I'm pleased to announce Walz to be the United States ambassador to the United Nations, which is basically a pointless position when you don't even acknowledge the United Nations charter or that they exist at all for the most part, and you just are a part of it because you kind of have to be. There's nothing that the United States does, or, you know, anyone really, whether it's Russia or any major, you know, aggressive country, is doing that's in line with the initial founding mandates of the United Nations. So anyways, I think he's going to be the representative. Marco Rubio will serve as National Security Advisor while continuing his strong leadership at the State Department for the time being. Some people are saying Witkoff could get the job, but Witkoff says he doesn't want the job. And it appears as though he's really just playing for time. You know, he's the guy they send in to kind of, you know, cool things down. He's the good cop, and then there's the bad cop. These are some of the fires coming out of Israel, some pretty intense scenes. And it just seems like one place after another on the planet, cities are burning down. Jasper, Hawaii, California. People already forgot about the California wildfires. And now wildfire season has finally started there. And I'm not sure what the situation is there right now, if they're still in a drought or what. But crazy times that we're currently living in. And let's not forget that all the while all this is happening, you have a Spain power outage, okay, the origins of which are still not fully understood. Then you have all of these cyber attacks. Like today, we had, there's just been lots of weird stuff happening on the web. I mean, these were mostly social media sites. Banking systems were down. We had cyber attacks in London at numerous stores. There was that transformer that went up in smoke on the same day or just before, I believe, or was it? It was in and around that time, circa Spain power outage. And so things are intensifying, and people think that you know, this Ukrainian deal is somehow going to be conducive towards peaceful negotiations. But the reality of it is what this guy has to say right here. He tells you exactly what's going to happen.
Each side knows what the other's terms for peace are.
This is a do with Ukraine.
It's going to be up to them to come to an agreement and stop this brutal conflict. It's not going anywhere, Brett. It's not going to end anytime soon. And I think for the Ukrainians, yes, of course, they're angry that they were invaded, but are we going to continue to lose thousands and thousands of soldiers over a few miles of territory?
Okay, now things are falling apart, but they're trying to keep the peace. And the Russians are going to play along as long as they possibly can. Right now, they're loading parts. They're claiming it's F-16 parts from the United States onto Ukrainian planes. I'm sure maybe they're going to go into Poland and then they're going to wheel these things over the border. I don't know how it works. But they're claiming that these are F-16 parts. Now they're fully wrapped up, so you can't really see. Are these just replacement parts for the current F-16s that they're using? Remember when I said before that even if they were to say we're only sending one F-16, you would never know, right? So we don't really know how many F-16s have fully made it into operation. We don't know who's flying the F-16s. I mean, one would be wise to assume that there's way more F-16s and that there's NATO pilots in those F-16s, okay? And remember, that's a nuclear-capable platform. So they're still sending weapons, and now this new deal that was brokered is basically going to facilitate a Lend-Lease style agreement where U.S. weapons are provided now with payments deferred to future mineral revenues, thus reducing immediate financial strain. So on the basis of these mineral rights or minerals mines that may be developed someday, the Ukrainians can now borrow money. So you see the scheme? That's what all this is about. Maybe those mines will never be developed because they can't even develop them in the United States and other places during peacetime because it's a very intense endeavor as far as I understand. It's industrially intense. It requires the build out of massive amounts of infrastructure. It's incredibly environmentally destructive. You're certainly not going to be able to do it in a war zone and not at margins that would be permitting of operations. So this is pretty a serious sleight of hand that is currently happening here. So Ukraine has proposed purchasing $50 billion in U.S. weapons, potentially through interest-bearing FMF loans or a lend-lease program using Ukraine's mineral resources as collateral. That's all this is about. Military-industrial complex, making money, continuing to arm Ukraine, making sure that the Russians can't make it to the river. The Russians want to make it to the river, and I think they're not going to stop until they get there. In fact, and take this one with a grain of salt, okay? There's a potential end game coming, and it could involve, some are estimating 200,000 North Korean troops. Now, again, take this with a massive grain of salt. But the North Koreans have a lot of troops that are essentially just collecting dust at the outposts. Now, this is what some bloggers on Telegram are saying who are apparently in the know. And again, you know, I'm not going to co-sign this. I'm just going to share this information because we've known for a long time that the Russians, even the Ukrainians, are saying they're planning a big offensive, and this might be it. It's going to involve attacks on key leaders in Kiev and decision-making centers, okay? The real leaders. As Berletica is going to talk about in the second part of that interview, part of the reason why they don't target Zelensky and some of the usual suspects is because he doesn't think that they're the ones who are actually making decisions, and all of these hotels that just mysteriously go up in flames, that those are the guys, the NATO troops that are hiding there are the ones who are actually calling the shots, and those are the ones that get murked. So what is at stake are precise attacks on key leaders in Kiev, parallel attacks on infrastructure and logistics, cyber operations against European targets. And remember, before World War III, we're going to see this ratcheting up of cyber events across the world. And even the engagement of operational groups outside the borders, okay? So that could be acts of sabotage and hybrid warfare. 200,000 North Korean troops are claimed. If all of this information is connected in one line, the release of reserves, the mapping of targets, compression of Ukrainian capacities, and the announcement of additional human resources, one gets the impression that something big is coming. Perhaps not right away, but very, very soon. So it would make sense that all of these deals and all of the chips are being positioned ahead of time, and the Russians don't stand to call attention to the fact that the United States is doing these things, because then, of course, they would look as the ones who are being uncooperative. This is Budanov. What he says, he's the SBU intelligence chief. He says that when asked about Victory Day in Moscow, he said, "Bring earplugs. No further comment developing." Now, obviously, this is something they're going to say because they want to keep the Russians on edge. They want them to allocate a numerous amount of resources. It's quite possible that on that day they'll target a different part of the battlefield entirely, right? And this is all just subterfuge. But nonetheless, it looks like sparks could fly on May 9th. And of course, that does seem to coordinate with the Iranian deadline. As I indicated the other day, for the first time in Russian media, they acknowledged the contradiction of Trump's promises of peace. And this golden dome, which is being proposed, which of course portends poorly for strategic negotiations, because of course it implies that it's going to be going up against Russian missiles. Now, the Russians claim that they have a nuclear-powered nuclear cruise missile that can evade not only a radar potentially, but any sort of missile defense, because it's maneuverable, and unlike a ICBM, they can't detect when it's launched. So there's that. They claim that they can defeat the Golden Dome. However, artificial intelligence is progressing so rapidly nowadays, it's very difficult to really know what the state of the art actually is, okay? So that's essentially what's going on. The war is ratcheting up on multiple fronts. Now, people are freaking out because of gold, okay? Gold had a slight haircut. Let's remember that gold is up 25% on the year, which is probably unprecedented since like the 70s, maybe. And, you know, just a month ago, people were looking at this and they were blown away that gold had passed $3,200. Now, all of the incredibly short-term thinkers are scratching their heads and second-guessing themselves. I mean, number one, it was just the end of the month, so probably a lot of people trying to balance their books. Gold had an incredible run in just the last 15 months, and to think that it's going to go up forever in a straight line is just stupid. But I'll tell you, if you look at the pattern, and I hate technical analysis because it really is astrology, but before every leg up with gold, you always see this, okay? There's always a massive decline. Like here we were up to 2,400 and then it went down to 2,300, which at the time was, what would that be? Like almost a 10% move, 2,450 down to 2,300. So I guess that would be about a 5% move or so. Okay, but here we have back in October of 2024, 2,800 bucks right before the election, crashed down about 20% to 2,586. Here we had that happen again with the tariffs. And remember, this move was all before tariffs, because gold rhymes with war. Not literally, but gold is for war, okay? And so here we had it rise up again, and then it crashed on the news that Trump would backpedal on the tariffs, which of course he didn't. And still to this day, the 145% tariffs that we are told, the ones that were supposedly put in suspension and caused the markets to rally like 12% in a day, they're still being imposed. Okay, so the fundamentals are still there. Now here we are again. We hit 3,500 bucks intraday. We've pulled back not less than 10%, but about 7 or 8%. This is perfectly normal, all right? And again, you don't even want this price to go up. You don't want the price of gold to go up, because that means that shit is getting really bad. Now, something else to keep in mind is that the dollar has strengthened in the past couple days. Not by much, by a couple percentage points, but that's significant, because usually a couple percentage point move in the dollar in either direction will be amplified in the price of gold. So if the dollar goes up 1%, usually, and there's not always a one-to-one correlation, because over time gold is still going up even relative to the dollar index, you'll see a bigger move in gold, like a 2%, 3% move in gold. Either way, these erratic, wild swings in the price of gold indicate extreme volatility, and it's not good for anybody, okay? Now, in terms of stocking up, because the Port of LA executive director is saying that retailers will soon only have about 7 weeks full of inventories left amid US-China trade war, and to front run those shortages, you'll likely see price increases ahead of time if companies think that the current inventory they have is the last they're ever going to get. Well, how are they going to make their money if they're not getting any more inventory? And it appears as though neither side is budging. The Chinese aren't budging and the Americans aren't budging. Or what this means is that we're going to continue to import from China at a significantly increased cost, and so that the price of things are going to go up for that reason. Either way, whether the shipments come in or they don't, the prices are going to go up. Port of Los Angeles says shipping volume will plummet 35% next week as tariffs start to take a bite. That was on the 29th, okay? Lots of aggressive rhetoric between the Chinese and Americans today. The Chinese are now suggesting that COVID-19 originated in the United States. Remember that the Wuhan lab was co-run by the United States and the Chinese, so both could feasibly be culpable for its release. Who knows where its origin was? Did it originate in the United States and was it brought to China? Who really knows? And then the Americans are releasing a CIA conscription video that's in Mandarin, playing in China, I believe, or possibly just around the world, because of course there is that great firewall, trying to recruit Chinese agents. So things are going from bad to worse. So not only has Trump's team amplified the wars in Ukraine and Iran, despite saying that they were going to broker peace with one phone call within 24 hours. And unlike the claims that Vladimir Putin was going to take over Kiev in 72 hours, that's not a fabrication. Trump literally said that. With one phone call, I will end the war. And here we are with J.D. Vance saying this war ain't going to stop for a long time. Meanwhile, the guys that they're arming are making threats against a victory parade, which is going to be attended by numerous world leaders, okay? And the only way that you can do an attack on Moscow is with the help of that American ISR. So that's how it's going. And now we have another real deal war emerging with China. So, but it's okay because Zuckerberg has something to say about what you can expect in the not so distant future. And we're going to be talking with Roman Yampolsky, who was recently, well, I guess not so recently, about 6 months ago, he was on Lex Fridman, and he was talking about the AI singularity and what the risks are associated with it. And needless to say, he's a bit of a doomer. Like me, he thinks humanity's basically doomed. But here's what Zuckerberg is talking about with respect to, you're going to need a friend to accompany you through the dark times ahead. And when you're in your bunker, you might as well have a friend that doesn't consume your food. Let's hear what he has to say.
I think as the personalization loop kicks in and the AI just starts to get to know you better and better, I think that will just be really compelling. One thing just from working on social media for a long time is there's the stat that I always think is crazy. The average American, I think it's fewer than 3 friends. 3 people that they'd consider friends. And the average person has demand for meaningfully more. I think it's like 15 friends or something, right? I guess there's probably some point where
not me.
You're like, all right, I'm just too busy. I can't deal with more people. But the average person wants more connectivity, connection than they have. So there's a lot of questions that people ask of stuff like, okay, is this going to replace kind of in-person connections or real-life connections? And my default is that the answer to that is probably no. I think I think that there are all these things that are better about kind of physical connections when you can.
Anyways, AI is going to replace your friends, or if you don't have any friends, AI is going to help you out. These guys had a little bit of an incident with their what looks like their unitary humanoid robot. They're trying to program it. Let's see what happens here. Okay, so they're programming in some movements, and note Exhibit A here. Starts moving his arms a little bit. He's swinging around. And these things, guys, I've seen these robots. In fact, we're going to be reviewing robots like it. And that's a lot of metal flailing around. That's a very dangerous situation. Crazy. Okay, now get a load of this one. This is crazy, all right? This is evolution of deep fakes. I'm not sure how well you can see that on the screen, but that looks like Elon Musk. It's not, but they've made some advancements in terms of lighting. And get a load of this real-time lighting.
This is the end.
Okay, I got to turn the sound off because I'm not sure if that's copywritten, but you can watch it. So you could see the various lighting. That's different. Usually with deepfakes, you can't change the lighting. So there he's Robert Downey Jr. Okay, so this is pretty incredible processing power that's required to do something like this. I mean, that's crazy. That looks real life. Leonardo DiCaprio when he was younger, I presume. So you got to have a code word with your family because chances are, especially if you're, somebody who is well known, you got to make sure you have that code word. Now, the polls have come out, and it looks like the breakdown by age for people who they voted for, conservatives, as I indicated in a previous video, overwhelmingly young people voted for conservative in this election, which is definitely bucking the historical trend. People 55 years or older got duped once again into voting for that other idiot. And, I guess they'll regret it when nobody has enough jobs to pay taxes to feed into retirement plans. I don't know. But I guess by that time we'll have robots wiping our asses anyways. We're only about 10 years away from that. And we'll have AI friends to talk to. And, maybe there'll be a silver lining to that with the AI is that, when you're withering away in an old folks home in the future and your family doesn't come to meet you because they're working 3 or 4 jobs, you'll be able to talk to a computer. And who knows, maybe the conversation will even be better. What's this here? Oh yeah, this is Donald Trump talking about how things are going great. Mark Carney ran on a platform of being anti-Trump, which of course I disagreed with. The Trump derangement syndrome is what they ran on. Now he's palling around with Trump and he's saying that we just had one of the best conversations ever and yeah, we're going to make a deal. So it turns out it was all a bunch of bullshit. Anyways, guys, I got to get going. I didn't expect this video to be that long. Don't worry about the price of gold. Just focus on the preparedness. This thing right now, this is what gold is doing right now. When an archer, first, what does he have to do? He's got to pull that arrow back, right? It's like taking a deep breath. The dragon or Godzilla, before he exhales that fury of fire or tsunami, the ocean pulls out first before that massive deluge comes in. That's what's happening with this. That's all it is. This is a normal consolidation. That run up to 3,500, that doesn't happen for no reason. That was a squeeze, okay? And, maybe they were able to paper it over for a little while, but everything points towards escalation. Everything I've told you today is supporting the thesis that gold is only going to continue to go higher in the long term. That's not financial advice. I'm not saying buy it. Okay? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.